She had just closed the biggest deal of her entire life. 14 months of negotiations, sleepless nights, countless board meetings, and strategic conversations with the most powerful financial institutions in North America all culminated in one moment at 11:47 a.m. on March 15, 2024. Jennifer Richardson's name was officially appended to a $900 million acquisition agreement. At that exact moment, she became a billionaire for the first time in her life. Her consulting firm, Meridian Global Strategies, was no longer just a thriving enterprise. It was transformed into something bigger, something more powerful, something that would secure her legacy for generations to come. Every risk she had ever taken, every sacrifice she had made during those grueling 18-hour days, every doubt she had pushed through with sheer force of will was now validated in the form of dollar signs and legally binding documentation. She immediately called her executive team into the conference room. Champagne was poured. Tears were shed. Tears of triumph, of accomplishment, of vindication. Jennifer stood in that room, surrounded by people she had hired, people she had mentored, people who had believed in her vision from the very beginning. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than the relentless pressure of growth and success. She felt genuine joy, pure accomplishment, validation. But that joy would be short-lived. Because at 7 p.m. that same evening, Jennifer Richardson walked into the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, wearing a dress that cost more than most people earn in 3 months. She had no idea that in 7 hours, that same achievement would be weaponized against her. She had no idea that the man across the table from her, her husband of 17 years, the man she had shared her life with, the man she had trusted with her deepest fears and her greatest dreams, had orchestrated something that would make her $900 million victory feel insignificant. He waited until the appetizers arrived. He waited until they were away from prying eyes, until the noise of the restaurant had fully absorbed their table into its ambient chaos. And then he smiled at her with an expression she had never seen before. Cold, calculating, triumphant. And he said words that would change the trajectory of her life forever. Words that suggested he had been planning this moment, waiting for this moment, orchestrating every detail of this moment with meticulous precision. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. So who was Jennifer Richardson? Who was this woman who had managed to accumulate a $900 million company from nothing but pure ambition and relentless work ethic? She was born in Portland, Oregon in 1981 to a middle-class family. Her father was an accountant. Her mother was a teacher. She was the middle child of 3 siblings, and from an early age, she demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to see patterns that others missed. She graduated from Stanford University with a degree in business administration and economics. She started her career at a mid-sized consulting firm in San Francisco, making $92,000 a year. But within 5 years, she had been promoted to senior analyst. Within 10 years, she was a vice president. And at 38 years old, she had left that firm and started Meridian Global Strategies with nothing but a business plan and investors who believed in her vision. Her company grew from $0 in revenue to serving Fortune 500 clients within 3 years. By 2024, Meridian Global Strategies was managing over $40 billion in client assets and generating $300 million in annual revenue. But Michael Richardson was a different story entirely. He was born in 1977 in New Jersey to a wealthy real estate family. His father had built a successful commercial real estate development company. Michael grew up expecting to inherit wealth and success, but what he received instead was pressure. Immense pressure to live up to expectations that had been set for him since childhood. He attended Yale University on his father's connections, majored in business, and was handed a position in his father's company upon graduation. He was given every advantage, every opportunity, every resource to succeed. And yet, despite all of this, he never managed to exceed his father's accomplishments. His projects underperformed. His partnerships dissolved. His vision never quite matched his ambition. By the time he met Jennifer, Michael was 41 years old and already feeling the weight of his own mediocrity pressing down on him like a physical force. When Jennifer and Michael met at a charity gala in Manhattan in 2006, he was immediately drawn to her intelligence, her confidence, her power. She was everything he had always wanted to be but couldn't quite manage to achieve. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within 1 year, they were married. Within 3 years, they had a son named David. On the surface, they appeared to be the perfect power couple. But underneath that carefully constructed facade, something darker was beginning to develop. As Jennifer's career accelerated and her wealth increased exponentially, Michael's sense of self began to erode. His business continued to underperform. His own career stagnated, and his resentment toward Jennifer's success grew deeper and more consuming with each passing year. So when this moment finally arrived, when Jennifer's greatest achievement was about to be celebrated, a critical question emerged. Why would a husband respond to his wife's triumph with cruelty instead of celebration? Why would he choose this exact moment to destroy her? And more importantly, what had he been planning that required him to wait for this specific day, this specific deal, this specific amount of money? But perhaps the most important question was one that Jennifer herself was about to ask. What else had he been hiding? Because the truth, when it finally emerged, was far darker than anyone could have anticipated. Jennifer and Michael's love story began like many others. They met on a cold evening in December 2006 at a charity gala benefiting children's cancer research. Jennifer had been invited by a colleague. Michael had been invited by his father. According to Jennifer's later accounts, Michael approached her at the bar and immediately began asking about her work. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on market trends, on business strategy, on her vision for her career. He listened, truly listened, in a way that made her feel seen and understood. For a woman who had spent her entire life pushing herself forward, competing in male-dominated spaces, and constantly having to prove her intelligence and competence, being truly listened to was intoxicating. Michael seemed to understand her ambitions. He seemed to celebrate her intelligence. He asked thoughtful questions and provided thoughtful insights. By the end of the evening, he had her phone number. Within 2 weeks, he had asked her to dinner. Within 2 months, he had proposed. She said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was elegant and expensive, held at a country club in Connecticut. 200 guests attended. The ceremony was traditional. The reception was lavish. Jennifer wore her mother's pearl necklace under her dress, a connection to her modest roots even as she ascended into Michael's world of inherited wealth and privilege. She was 25 years old. She felt like the luckiest woman alive. But within the first year of their marriage, small cracks began to appear in the foundation. Jennifer was promoted to senior analyst at her consulting firm. Michael's father decided to semi-retire, handing over more responsibility to Michael. Michael was struggling with the transition. He was making decisions that were questionable, investing in properties that didn't perform, partnering with developers who didn't share his vision or his values. Jennifer was working 70-hour weeks. Michael was at home, ostensibly managing the family's real estate portfolio, but increasingly spending his time scrolling through news articles about Jennifer's success. By 2009, when their son David was born, Jennifer took only 6 weeks of maternity leave before returning to work. It wasn't a choice she wanted to make. It was a necessity. The firm she was working for was in the middle of a major expansion, and her presence was essential. Michael stayed home with David, which should have been a beautiful bonding opportunity. But instead, he spent many of those days angry. Angry that he was the one changing diapers while his wife was in boardrooms making decisions that affected thousands of people. Angry that her career was moving forward while his seemed stuck in place. Angry that people knew her name but didn't know his. Angry that in the hierarchy of their marriage, she had become the powerful one and he had become the dependent one. Between 2009 and 2015, Michael's resentment grew like a cancer. It metastasized slowly at first, then more aggressively. Jennifer noticed, on some level, that something had changed in him. He made comments about her work, comments that seemed harmless on the surface but carried a sharp edge underneath. "You're working late again? I guess David doesn't need his mother tonight. Must be nice having a job so important that your family comes second." She would try to explain the necessity of what she was doing, the importance of the clients she served, the responsibility she carried. But Michael would dismiss her explanations with a wave of his hand. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower. He started looking at her credit card statements. He started asking detailed questions about her business dealings, her client relationships, her salary negotiations. At first, Jennifer thought it was curiosity. Later, she realized it was surveillance. By 2014, their marriage had become something cold and transactional. They stayed together for David. They stayed together because divorce was complicated and expensive. They stayed together because Michael had learned something critical about Jennifer's financial life that made him realize he could extract far more value from her by remaining married than by leaving. Michael began researching divorce laws with meticulous care. He was building a case against Jennifer. He was documenting every late night she worked, every family dinner she missed, every school event she couldn't attend because of business. He was gathering ammunition that he would later use to portray her as a neglectful mother, an absent wife, a woman so consumed with ambition that she had abandoned her family obligations. He wasn't planning a divorce, not yet. He was planning something more calculated. He was waiting for the right moment. He was waiting for a moment so significant, so substantial, that Jennifer would have accumulated enough wealth and assets to make the divorce financially devastating to her. He was waiting for the $900 million moment. March 15th, 2024 began like any other Friday morning in New York City. The sun rose over Manhattan at 6:47 a.m. Jennifer Richardson woke up at 5:30 a.m., as she had done nearly every morning for the past 18 months. She went through her routine with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times before. She showered. She dressed in a tailored navy suit from a designer whose name only the wealthy recognized. She did her makeup with careful attention to detail. She took her medications, a low-dose antidepressant she had been taking for 3 years to manage anxiety, and a sleep aid she took occasionally when the stress of work made sleep impossible. She drank black coffee while reviewing emails on her phone. By 6:45 a.m., she was in her car, being driven by her personal driver toward the Meridian Global Strategies office in Midtown Manhattan. She didn't know, as she sat in that car, that this day would be the most significant day of her entire life. Not because of what would happen in the office, but because of what would happen at dinner that evening. When Jennifer arrived at the Meridian Global Strategies offices on the 42nd floor of a gleaming tower on Fifth Avenue, she immediately went to the executive conference room where her board was already assembling. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The acquisition deal with Berkshire Financial Group had been negotiated for 14 months. The due diligence had been completed. The contracts had been reviewed by attorneys on both sides. The financial arrangements had been finalized. All that remained was the symbolic act of signing the documents and initiating the wire transfers that would make the acquisition official. Jennifer sat at the head of the table. The board members sat on either side. Legal counsel sat at one end. The acquisition documents were bound and waiting. Jennifer took a deep breath. She picked up the pen. She looked around the table at the faces of the people who had helped her build this company from nothing. Then she placed her signature on the line designated Chief Executive Officer and Founder. The room erupted. At 11:47 a.m. on March 15th, 2024, the wire transfer was initiated. $900 million began moving electronically through banking systems around the world. By 12:15 p.m., the transfer was complete. Jennifer Richardson's stake in Meridian Global Strategies, representing 60% ownership, had been converted into cash. She was, on paper, a billionaire. The news was immediately released to the media. Financial news networks carried the story. Bloomberg terminals around the world displayed the announcement. Within hours, Jennifer Richardson's name was trending on Twitter. Business magazines were already preparing cover stories about her achievement. She was featured prominently in financial news segments as the latest example of the self-made billionaire success story. But Jennifer, sitting in her office, knew that none of this mattered yet. None of this would mean anything if Michael found out about the deal before she could tell him herself at dinner. Jennifer had called Michael that morning before the signing, as she did every morning. "Big day today, babe," she had said. Michael's response had been brief and cold. "Hope it goes well." That was all. No enthusiasm. No encouragement. No sense that he understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. Jennifer had felt the chill in those 4 words, but she had pushed the feeling aside. She was focused on the signing. She was focused on the execution of the deal. She had thought about the evening ahead, their 17th anniversary dinner at Marcello's, their favorite restaurant, the same restaurant where Michael had proposed to her 15 years earlier. She had thought about how perfect it would be to celebrate both the anniversary and the deal at the same table, in the same place where he had pledged his eternal love and devotion to her. She had thought about how this would be the moment they reconnected. She had thought about how this financial security would remove the stress from their marriage. She had thought about how Michael would finally be proud of her. At 5 p.m., Jennifer left her office. She didn't go home. Instead, she went to a luxury salon on the Upper West Side where she had a standing appointment every Friday afternoon. She got her nails done. She got her hair styled. She sat in the chair while a makeup artist applied cosmetics to her face with the precision of someone creating a work of art. She was preparing herself for the evening. She was preparing herself to be beautiful for her husband. She was preparing herself to share the greatest achievement of her life with the man who had promised to stand beside her forever. What she didn't know, as she sat in that salon chair, was that Michael had spent the entire day making his own preparations. He had contacted a lawyer. He had gathered documentation. He had taken screenshots of financial records. He had secured access to information that would form the basis of his divorce case. He had planned this moment with the meticulous care of a general planning a military campaign. By 6:30 p.m., Jennifer was standing outside her apartment building, waiting for her car. She wore a black dress that draped elegantly across her body. Diamond earrings caught the light. Her dark hair was styled in waves. Her makeup was flawless. She looked every bit the powerful, successful, beautiful woman that she was. She was happy. She was excited. She was looking forward to an evening with her husband. She was looking forward to sharing her joy with him. She had no idea what was waiting for her at that restaurant. She had no idea that the evening ahead would be the last happy evening of her marriage. She had no idea that in just minutes, her entire life was about to be dismantled. The car pulled up. She got in. The driver navigated through Manhattan traffic toward Marcello's restaurant. Traffic was heavy. It was Friday evening in the city. But by 7:15 p.m., she was pulling up to the restaurant entrance. And there, waiting in the lobby, was Michael Richardson. He was already there, waiting for her. His expression was completely unreadable. They sat across from each other at a table that had been reserved months earlier. Jennifer had actually made the reservation herself when the deal with Berkshire Financial Group had seemed inevitable. She had wanted to create the perfect setting for celebrating both the anniversary and the company milestone. She had specifically requested the corner table, the one with the best view of the city lights through the windows. She had told the restaurant staff that this was a special occasion and that they should make it memorable. The waiter brought water. The waiter brought rolls and butter. The waiter began explaining the specials. Michael barely listened. He was staring at Jennifer with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She was trying to make small talk. She was trying to fill the silence with pleasant conversation about their son David's school week, about a restaurant they had been meaning to try, about a vacation she had been researching to Bali for later in the year. But Michael wasn't engaging. He was staring at her, and his stare contained something that Jennifer couldn't quite identify. Anger, certainly, but also something else. Triumph, perhaps. Calculation. Inevitability. When the waiter brought the Cristal champagne that Jennifer had ordered to celebrate, Michael grabbed Jennifer's wrist. Not violently, but firmly, decisively. His grip was strong enough to convey a message without causing pain. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock. Michael said 4 words. "We need to talk." Jennifer's first reaction was confusion. Was something wrong with David? Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? But Michael's expression told her that this wasn't about any of those things. This was about something else entirely. He said, very quietly, very calmly, but with absolute certainty, "I've known about the deal for weeks. I followed your work emails. I reviewed your calendar. I know everything about the acquisition. I know the exact dollar amount. I know the exact structure of the transaction. I know everything." Jennifer's first instinct was to pull her hand away. Her second instinct was to deny, but she didn't do either. She sat completely still. She stared at Michael, and she asked the only question that mattered. How? How had he accessed her work emails? How had he reviewed her calendar? How had he obtained information that was secured behind multiple layers of corporate cybersecurity? Michael smiled. Not a nice smile. A cold, calculating smile. The smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment, preparing for this moment, planning for this moment, and had finally arrived at the moment where he could reveal his hand. He said, very quietly, "I've had access to everything for 4 years. Every email, every document, every confidential discussion with your board. I've been reading everything, and I've been using it." Jennifer pulled her hand away from his grasp. She didn't say anything immediately. She was trying to process what he had just said. He had been accessing her work emails for 4 years. 4 years of corporate espionage. 4 years of theft of intellectual property. 4 years of monitoring her business decisions, her strategic conversations, her client relationships, her salary negotiations. 4 years of documenting her business activities in meticulous detail. Jennifer's mind was racing through the implications. Her company had been breached. Her clients' information had been exposed. Her business strategies had been compromised. Everything she had been building, everything she had been protecting, had been penetrated by the man sleeping in her bed every night. Then Michael continued speaking, and his next words made everything worse. He said, "I've been using what I found. I've been selling it. Your company's trade secrets have been sold to 3 different competitors. The contracts are in place. The money has been transferred. Millions of dollars have been paid to me in exchange for information that your company considered so valuable, so important, so critical to your competitive advantage, that you paid top-dollar attorneys millions of dollars to protect it." Then Michael made his final statement of the evening. He said, "I've also called my lawyers. We're done, Jennifer. The marriage is over. I want full custody of David, or at the very least, I want him 50% of the time. And I want 50% of all assets accumulated during our marriage. My lawyer says I'm entitled to it. Everything you've earned, I'm entitled to half of it. Which means I'm entitled to half of that $900 million deal. $450 million. That's what you owe me." Jennifer stared at him. She didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. She was completely unable to process what was happening. The man across from her, the man she had married 17 years earlier, the man with whom she had created a child, the man she had trusted completely, had just revealed that he had systematically stolen from her company, sold her business secrets to competitors, and was now demanding half of her assets. But there was more. He wasn't finished. Michael said, "I've also been documenting your parenting failures for the past 2 years. I have records of every time you worked past David's bedtime. I have documentation of every school event you missed. I have records of every night you were traveling for work instead of being home with him. I have emails where you've deprioritized family time in favor of business. I have text messages where you've canceled family plans for work emergencies. I have a comprehensive file demonstrating that you have been a neglectful mother and an absent wife. When we go to court, and we will go to court, I'm going to paint you as a woman so consumed with ambition that she abandoned her family obligations. I'm going to make you look like the worst mother and wife in that courtroom. And I'm going to make myself look like the victim, like the man who sacrificed everything for a wife who had nothing but contempt for family." Jennifer finally found her voice. She asked him how he had accessed her work emails. How had he penetrated the security of her company's systems? The answer was simple, in a way that made it even more devastating. Michael said, "I had help. I've had an inside person at your company this entire time. Someone who has access to your servers, your emails, your documents, your confidential files. Someone who has been feeding me information for 4 years. Someone who understood that your security systems, your corporate infrastructure, your digital life was ripe for exploitation. And that person works for you. That person sits in your executive conference room. That person has your complete trust. That person is Marcus Chen, your chief technology officer." Jennifer Richardson left the restaurant without finishing her dinner, without ordering a main course, without giving any explanation to the server, without looking back at her husband. She walked out into the Manhattan evening with only one thought in her mind. She needed to get to her office. She needed to verify what Michael had said. She needed to confirm whether Marcus Chen had actually been accessing her company's systems. She needed to know the extent of the damage. Within 5 minutes, her driver had picked her up. The car drove through Manhattan traffic toward the Meridian Global Strategies offices in Midtown. Jennifer sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her mind spinning with implications and questions and worst-case scenarios. She was calling her attorney, Rebecca Torres, at 8:15 p.m. on a Friday evening. Rebecca was having dinner with her family, but she recognized Jennifer's number and took the call immediately. "Jennifer, what's wrong?" Jennifer said, "I need you to tell me what can be done if a company has been breached by an insider. I need to know immediately, and I need to know if it's a criminal matter." Rebecca said, "Meet me at my office. I'll have a cybersecurity firm and a criminal attorney there in 30 minutes. By 9 p.m., Jennifer was in a conference room with her personal attorney, Rebecca Torres, a cybersecurity firm called Sentinel Digital Security, and a criminal attorney named David Schwartz. She explained what Michael had told her. She provided names: Marcus Chen, Berkshire Financial Group's competing firms. She outlined the 14-month timeline of the acquisition deal. She explained the security protocols that her company had in place, the multi-factor authentication, the encryption, the cybersecurity measures that she had invested millions of dollars implementing, because she understood that her company's intellectual property was her company's greatest asset. The cybersecurity team immediately said they could run a forensic analysis of her company's servers. They would need immediate access to her network. They would need to audit the system logs for the past 4 years. They would need to identify every unauthorized access, every file transfer, every data download. Jennifer gave them authorization immediately. "Pull the information. I don't care what time it is. I don't care what you have to do. I need to know the extent of this," she said. By midnight, the preliminary results were in. The cybersecurity team had identified unauthorized access to Jennifer's company servers dating back exactly 47 months, 3 months and 2 weeks before Michael had decided to start the corporate espionage operation. The logs showed a pattern of access that was consistent, methodical, and clearly designed to avoid detection. Files were being downloaded during off hours. Large data transfers were being broken up into smaller chunks to avoid triggering security alerts. The person accessing the systems was using credentials that belonged to Marcus Chen, the chief technology officer. But more detailed analysis showed that in many cases, the access was coming from IP addresses that were not associated with Marcus Chen's typical locations: his home, his office, his usual coffee shops where he worked remotely. Some of the access was coming from locations associated with hotels. Some of the access was coming from locations in New Jersey and Connecticut. And upon further investigation, those IP addresses matched locations where Michael Richardson had been documented to be present at the same time. Michael Richardson had been physically accessing the systems himself, using credentials that Marcus Chen had provided to him. The financial impact was staggering. Over the 47-month period, Marcus Chen and Michael Richardson had stolen intellectual property and business information that Meridian Global Strategies had valued at over $200 million in terms of competitive advantage. They had sold this information to three competing consulting firms that had been bidding against Meridian Global Strategies for the same clients, the same contracts, the same business opportunities. The information they had stolen included client lists, pricing strategies, proposal templates, financial models, market research, competitive analysis, and strategic planning documents. In essence, they had given Meridian Global Strategies competitors the roadmap to compete against Meridian, and they had been compensated handsomely for doing so. Between the three competing firms, Michael Richardson and Marcus Chen had received $47 million in payments over the 4-year period. The payments had been made to shell companies that had been set up for the express purpose of receiving these transfers. The money had then been transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and Singapore. Money that, according to the criminal attorney David Schwartz, constituted criminal proceeds that could be seized by the federal government. By 2 a.m., Rebecca Torres had already contacted the FBI. A special agent named Patricia Williams was assigned to the case. By 4 a.m., special agents from the FBI Cyber Division were meeting with Jennifer, Rebecca, and the cybersecurity team at the Meridian Global Strategies offices. By 6 a.m., they had obtained a warrant to examine Marcus Chen's home and office equipment. By 8 a.m. on March 16th, Marcus Chen was being arrested at his apartment. The news of his arrest was immediate and shocking. The chief technology officer of Meridian Global Strategies was being led out of his building in handcuffs by federal agents. The story was being reported by every financial news network in the country within the hour. CTO of Meridian Global Strategies arrested in espionage investigation. Within 2 hours, the news had also broken that the arrest was connected to Michael Richardson, the spouse of CEO Jennifer Richardson. By noon, the headline had shifted: CEO Jennifer Richardson's husband implicated in corporate espionage scheme. By 2 p.m., Michael Richardson had been arrested at his law office, where he had shown up the morning after the dinner confrontation, seemingly unbothered by the consequences of what he had done. Jennifer called an emergency board meeting at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, March 16th. She didn't call it to celebrate the $900 million acquisition deal that had officially closed just 30 hours earlier. She called it to inform her board of directors that the company had been the victim of a 4-year-long corporate espionage operation conducted by her chief technology officer and her husband. She explained that business secrets valued at $200 million had been stolen and sold to competitors. She explained that an FBI investigation was underway. She explained that both her chief technology officer and her husband were now in federal custody pending charges. She explained that the security of the company had been compromised at the highest levels. She presented the preliminary findings from the cybersecurity investigation. She showed the forensic evidence. She answered technical questions. And then she waited for her board to respond. What happened next was completely unexpected. Instead of expressing sympathy for Jennifer, instead of offering support to a CEO who had just navigated the most traumatic 24 hours of her professional life, the board began asking accusatory questions. They wanted to know how Jennifer had failed to implement adequate security controls. They wanted to know why the chief technology officer had been allowed such unrestricted access to sensitive systems. They wanted to know why Jennifer hadn't detected the breach herself. They wanted to know what oversight Jennifer had been exercising over Marcus Chen. They wanted to know what internal controls had been in place to prevent this situation. Each question carried with it an implicit accusation. This was Jennifer's fault. Jennifer was responsible for this situation. Jennifer's leadership had enabled this catastrophe. One board member, Derek Hampton, who had always seemed supportive of Jennifer's leadership, began asking particularly aggressive questions. By the end of the board meeting, which lasted approximately 2 hours, a motion had been made and seconded to suspend Jennifer Richardson as Chief Executive Officer, pending a comprehensive review of her leadership and the company's security practices. A vote was called. 9 board members voted in favor of the suspension. 3 board members voted against it. 1 board member abstained. The vote was carried. Jennifer Richardson was being suspended as Chief Executive Officer of the company that she had founded and built from nothing. The board then voted to appoint Derek Hampton as Interim Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Derek Hampton had been on the board for 4 years. He had been brought onto the board by Michael Richardson as a personal favor to an old friend. Derek Hampton and Michael Richardson had gone to boarding school together. Derek Hampton had been staying at Michael Richardson's beach house in the Hamptons every summer for the past 3 years. Derek Hampton was not just a board member. Derek Hampton was Michael Richardson's friend. Jennifer was escorted out of the building by security within the hour. Her access badge was deactivated. Her computer access was terminated. She was told that she could not enter the Meridian Global Strategies offices without explicit written permission from the interim chief executive officer. She was told that she could not contact employees. She was told that her employment was under review. She was told that the company would be conducting an internal investigation into her conduct. Within 2 hours of leaving the building, news had broken to the financial media. Jennifer Richardson suspended as CEO of Meridian Global Strategies, pending security review. Within 4 hours, the news had evolved. Interim CEO Derek Hampton takes over following spousal espionage scandal. The narrative was immediately shifting. Jennifer was no longer the victim of corporate espionage. Jennifer was becoming the villain, the CEO who had failed to implement adequate security, who had allowed her personal relationships to compromise the company's data, who had been unable to manage her marriage or her company simultaneously. Rebecca Torres met with Jennifer at her apartment that afternoon. Rebecca was working on understanding Derek Hampton's connections. She was having investigators look into his background, his financial records, his communications with Michael Richardson. By evening, Rebecca had discovered something troubling. Derek Hampton had been in communication with Michael Richardson via email and phone calls dating back more than a year. The communications were disguised as casual conversation, but when analyzed with forensic expertise, they contained coded language that suggested coordination. Further investigation revealed that Derek Hampton had met with Michael Richardson and Marcus Chen on at least 5 separate occasions in the year leading up to the corporate espionage operation becoming active. Derek Hampton had met with Michael Richardson the day before the dinner confrontation at Marcello's restaurant. Derek Hampton was not just connected to the conspiracy. Derek Hampton was a willing participant in it. Jennifer had been betrayed not once, but multiple times. She had been betrayed by her husband. She had been betrayed by her chief technology officer. She had been betrayed by one of her board members. But there was more betrayal coming. There was another person who had been part of this conspiracy, and Jennifer wouldn't discover their involvement until later. But for now, on the evening of March 16th, with her company suspended from leadership, with her reputation in tatters, with federal investigators examining every detail of her personal and professional life, Jennifer Richardson sat in her apartment and allowed herself to cry. The stress of 24 hours without sleep, the emotional devastation of discovering that multiple people she had trusted had conspired against her, the humiliation of being suspended from the company she had founded, the loss of control over her own narrative, it all crashed down on her at once. She cried for hours. She cried until she had no tears left. And then she sat in the darkness of her apartment and asked herself a question that she couldn't answer. How had she not seen this coming? The narrative being constructed by the media was not sympathetic to Jennifer Richardson. Yes, she had been the victim of corporate espionage. Yes, she had been victimized by her husband and her chief technology officer. But the media framing was different. The media was asking, how could Jennifer Richardson not have known what was happening in her own company? How could a CEO, who prides herself on attention to detail and comprehensive oversight, have allowed her company's security to be so thoroughly compromised? How could a billionaire business executive have been so oblivious to what her own spouse was doing? The narrative was shifting from woman victimized by husband's betrayal to woman reveals incompetence through inability to maintain control of her company. The narrative was shifting from male perpetrator of corporate espionage to female CEO's failure to exercise proper oversight. Jennifer's gender was becoming central to the way her situation was being portrayed. She was being held to a different standard than a male CEO would have been held to. What happened next was almost worse than the corporate espionage itself. The internet turned on Jennifer Richardson. Reddit began constructing a narrative about her. Yes, her husband had engaged in corporate espionage. Yes, her chief technology officer had helped him. But somehow, Jennifer was being blamed for not maintaining her marriage properly. Jennifer was being blamed for not prioritizing her family. Jennifer was being blamed for being too ambitious, too focused on work, too cold, too detached. Leaked private text messages between Jennifer and Michael, presumably leaked by Derek Hampton's team to damage her further, were appearing on social media. The text messages showed Jennifer saying things like, "I can't miss the board meeting for David's school play," and "Tell David I'm sorry I'll be late getting home." Taken out of context and stripped of the reality that she had been working 70-hour weeks while managing a multi-billion-dollar company, these text messages were being used to portray her as a bad mother. People on social media were saying things like, "She deserves what's happening to her," and "This is what happens when you prioritize money over family." Jennifer was experiencing something that has been documented across multiple case studies of powerful women in corporate America. She was experiencing backlash. She was experiencing the phenomenon where women in powerful positions are held to a different standard than men in the same positions. A male CEO whose company had been breached by corporate espionage would have been offered sympathy and support. A male CEO whose spouse had betrayed him would have been portrayed as a victim. But Jennifer Richardson was not being offered that sympathy. Instead, she was being criticized for her choices, for her ambition, for her unwillingness to prioritize her family over her career. The fact that she had built a $900 million company from nothing was being used against her, not as evidence of her brilliance, but as evidence of her misplaced priorities. The fact that she had been victimized by corporate espionage was being minimized in favor of focusing on her personal failures. By March 17th, less than 48 hours after the dinner confrontation, Jennifer Richardson was not the victim in the public narrative. She was the villain. She was the woman whose ambition had destroyed her marriage, whose focus on work had damaged her relationships with her son, whose failure to maintain proper oversight had allowed her company to be breached. The internet had decided that she deserved what happened to her. Jennifer was watching all of this unfold. She was seeing the comments. She was seeing the articles. She was seeing the social media pile-on. She was in her apartment with her son David, who had also seen some of the social media comments, some of the news coverage. David was confused. David was being told by his classmates that his mother was responsible for his father's crimes. David was being hurt by the way his mother was being portrayed. Jennifer was trying to explain to her son that she was a victim of corporate espionage, but her son was also seeing the social media criticism, the Reddit threads, the public blame being directed toward his mother. The isolation that Jennifer was experiencing was becoming even more profound. Not only was she isolated from her professional life, not only was she isolated from her company, not only was she isolated from her board, but she was also now experiencing a kind of social isolation where the public narrative had turned against her completely. The federal investigation into the corporate espionage case against Michael Richardson, Marcus Chen, and Derek Hampton proceeded with meticulous speed. The evidence against all three men was overwhelming. The financial records were clear. The digital forensics were undeniable. The communications between the three conspirators were documented and conclusive. The FBI moved quickly to build their case. Interviews were conducted. Warrants were executed. Devices were seized and analyzed. By April 2024, just 3 weeks after the discovery of the conspiracy, the federal grand jury returned an indictment against all three defendants. Michael Richardson was charged with 18 counts, including corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Marcus Chen was charged with 21 counts, including the same crimes plus computer fraud and unauthorized access to computer systems. Derek Hampton was charged with 12 counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. All three men faced decades in federal prison if convicted on all counts. Michael Richardson's attorney immediately began negotiating with prosecutors. Michael wanted to plead guilty to a subset of the charges in exchange for a more lenient sentence. Marcus Chen's attorney was advising him that the evidence was overwhelming and that his best option was to cooperate with the government by testifying against the other defendants. Derek Hampton's attorney was making the same recommendation. Michael Richardson was in a federal courtroom, wearing an expensive suit provided by his attorney. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the charges against him. He was entering a plea of guilty to 12 counts. The remaining counts were being dismissed as part of the plea agreement. He was being sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The judge was reading the sentence. Michael was expressionless as the sentence was delivered. FBI agents were placing him in handcuffs. He was being led out of the courtroom. Jennifer was in the gallery watching this happen. She wasn't satisfied. She wasn't happy. She was just devastated. She came to court hoping that seeing Michael punished would bring her some sense of closure or justice. Instead, she just felt empty. But before the conclusion of this story, before the end of Jennifer Richardson's journey, there was one more revelation that needed to happen. There was one more person who had been part of this conspiracy, and Jennifer didn't even know about it yet. In late April 2024, during the federal trial proceedings, the FBI discovered something unexpected during the forensic analysis of financial records. There had been another person providing Michael Richardson with strategic information about Jennifer's business. There had been another person offering guidance and advice that had helped Michael execute his plan to betray Jennifer. That person was Victor Zhao, one of the major investors in Meridian Global Strategies. Victor Zhao had been brought into Meridian Global Strategies 7 years earlier, when Jennifer was looking for capital to expand the company. He had provided $30 million in funding. In return, he had received a 5% stake in the company. He had served on the board of advisors. He had been someone Jennifer trusted completely. He had been someone Jennifer considered a mentor and a friend. Victor Zhao wasn't being charged with any crimes. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't hacked any systems. He hadn't engaged in corporate espionage. But he had positioned himself to take advantage of Jennifer's misfortune. He had seen an opportunity for profit in her devastation. He had met with Derek Hampton in March 2024 to discuss the possibility of Meridian Global Strategies being available for acquisition at a price far below what it would be worth under normal circumstances. He had been planning to swoop in, acquire the company at a fraction of its value, remove Jennifer from any leadership position, and make hundreds of millions of dollars from her downfall. The only difference between Victor Zhao and the other conspirators was that he hadn't pulled the trigger on his plan. He had been waiting to see how the legal proceedings would unfold. He had been waiting for Jennifer's reputation to be sufficiently damaged. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment never came. By May 2024, the federal trial had concluded. Michael Richardson had been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Marcus Chen had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after providing testimony against the other defendants. Derek Hampton had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison after also providing testimony. The sentences had been harsh, but not as harsh as they could have been. Jennifer Richardson had won her legal case. The men who had conspired against her had been convicted and were now in federal prison. But what had she actually won? She had lost her company. She had lost her position. She had lost her reputation in the eyes of the public. She had lost the trust of her board. She had lost the support of investors who had become afraid of being associated with her situation. She had lost millions of dollars in legal fees defending herself against the conspiracy. She had lost the joy of building and running her company. She had lost, more devastatingly, the summer of 2024 with her son David, who had been dealing with the shame of his father's crimes and the guilt of his mother's humiliation. What she had gained was the knowledge that she had survived. That was all. Just the knowledge that she had survived. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 1 year after the dinner at Marcelo's restaurant, after the confrontation that had set all of this in motion, Jennifer Richardson made an announcement. She was starting a new consulting firm, not to compete with Meridian Global Strategies, which was now being run by people who had no connection to her vision or her values, but to prove something to herself, to prove that she couldn't be destroyed by betrayal, to prove that she couldn't be silenced by those who conspired against her, to prove that even when everything was taken from her, she still had her intelligence, her work ethic, her ability to see what others couldn't see. The new company, which she named Phoenix Consulting Group, was capitalized with investments from venture capitalists who had followed her story and admired her resilience. Within 18 months, Phoenix Consulting Group had secured $200 million in contracts. Within 2 years, it had been valued at over $600 million. Jennifer Richardson was rebuilding. She was starting over. She was proving that the moment when her husband had humiliated her at their anniversary dinner was not the end of her story. It was just a chapter in a much longer narrative about resilience, about strength, about the ability to survive betrayal and move forward. And perhaps that's the real victory. Not winning in court, but the ability to keep going when everyone says you should give up. Jennifer was healthier. She was smiling. But there was a depth to her smile that wasn't there before. It was a smile that understood pain, that had survived devastation, that knew the worst that people can do to each other and had decided to move forward anyway. David was visiting her office after school. He was proud of his mother. They were talking. They were reconnecting. The relationship that had been damaged by the media pylon was being repaired. Slowly, carefully, but being repaired. Jennifer was teaching her son that resilience is not about not being knocked down. Resilience is about getting back up. Jennifer was teaching her son that betrayal happens. But betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It can be a beginning of something new, something different, something that is built on a stronger foundation than what was there before.